Welcome to the Big Questions podcast, where we talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and we're changing things up this episode. Our guest is Billy Corgan, founder of the Smashing Pumpkins. He's also our guest editor for the Highland Park News in Highland Park, his adopted hometown and part of the Chicago Sun-Times media local publications. Corgan took time out from recording 2 new Smashing Pumpkins records to talk about his life on Chicago's North Shore, his forthcoming spiritual memoir, and a yet-to-be-released song cycle inspired by Chicago. Corgan sat down with me in Madame Zuzu's tea shop, which he owns in Highland Park, and in our wide-ranging conversation, he talked about why Twitter makes him more lonely, and what he's willing to share about his albums on social media. As part of his guest editorship, Corgan also talks about the animal charity PAWS, for which he has 2 cats. The Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. Check them out at shure.com. That's SHURE.com. We're also sponsored by KZF Development in Northbrook, Illinois. You can find them on the web at kzfdev.com. And our analytics are provided by PodTrack. The Big Questions podcast is a part of Sun-Times Media Local's podcast network.
Weekend warrior painters and stuff, bears and stuff like that, it's fine, but...
Billy, you could have lived anywhere. Why Highland Park?
Well, I bought a house up here in 2003, I think.
Yeah.
And David Lather home, so it's a great honor to own a great architect home.
Yeah.
And so that's it. I'm stuck here.
but why? I mean, was it just the home, or was it the community? Like I said, you can live anywhere. Like, so why did you even look up here?
Well, growing up in the western suburbs, as I did, I sort of idealized what it was like to live up on the North Shore. And of course, there's the Gatsby-like version of the dream, and there's the reality of that dream. So being a Chicago boy, I was born in the city. The idea of living on the lake, I think, was, to me, was emblematic of some sort of success. That if you could live on the lake, that meant you had arrived. And so I always had this dream in the back of my mind, if I ever was successful, I'd want a home on the lake. Mm-hmm. I know when I used to drive by and look at some of these lakefront houses, even up in Indiana and Michigan, I would just I can't believe that, what beauty, to wake up to every day. So, I tried to leave Illinois a bunch of times, and I always came home. So for me, it was trying to find a permanent residence, with the idea that I could, of course, live anywhere else I want, when I want, but I needed to have one home here.
Right. Well, and what kind of inspiration then do you get from Highland Park? How is it different than saying, writing Gish, in an apartment above the music box? So literally, what is that artistic space? What are the influences?
Well, I think it's interesting because when I first started looking up on the North Shore, I guess, in the late 90s for a home, I, of course, looked at Evanston and Lake Forest and Winnetka and places like that, and I just never felt like it was the right fit for somebody like me. Maybe those places are a little too stuffy, or a little too this, or a little too that, one way or the other. What attracted me to Highland Park as a city was it sort of didn't have a feel that made me feel from where I came from that I didn't belong. I know this doesn't make proper English.
It's okay.
I felt like I could come here and I wasn't going to have some sort of identity imposed on me. Mm-hmm. Where if I went to maybe another community, that was definitely going to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you seem to have integrated. Not only do you have Madame Zuzu's where we're recording, but I just had lunch down at Happy Sushi. Your name is on the menu. Your name is up on the board.
There's two Billy rolls.
Okay.
Billy Roll 1 and 2.
And what are they? Because I didn't try them.
Billy Roll 1 is, which I can't eat anymore because of health issues, nothing to do with them.
Sure.
Has 3 different types of tobacco on it, and I think it's tuna.
Okay.
Billy Roll 2 is crab, jalapeno, I think cucumber.
Yeah, well, very cool.
Very good. I highly recommend Billy Roll number 2.
All right, we'll check it out. Well, and again, as far as integrating your yourself into Highland Park, is your has your Highland Park home has it become sort of a space for collaboration, or is it more your fortress of solitude?
Collaboration in what regard?
In music, in...
Oh, no, I mean living in a beautiful home designed by a genius of an architect.
Yeah.
You can't help but be inspired, even if it just means you got to get up and help try to pay for it, which is part of the inspiration. I live on a beautiful piece of property. I live in a community that respects my privacy.
Sure.
And I feel blessed to be up here. So, having grown up where I grew up, where you had neighbors on top of you and, really no privacy, even if you had a fence, you didn't have a real privacy. That's real important to me. And I'm still connected to the city by being up here. I'm not living out in the middle of Montana somewhere. I could do that too.
Yeah, I'm from Montana, so thanks for the name check. Yeah. But are you actually?
I may end up in Montana the way the country's going.
It's lovely. You'll have good company there. But I'm really interested in that space. So I mean, not only is it your home, but do you have a recording studio there as well? No. So it's all offsite.
Yeah.
So I just want to come back to my original question. Then is it then more like a fortress of solitude? Is it is that its function for you?
I don't know. I'm not too comfortable talking about my home. I don't feel like you're being invasive, but I feel like maybe I'm from the old school, but it's like when you shut the door, what goes on in there is sort of like the mystery, you know what I mean? And that's maybe more of a 40s mentality, like Leave It to Beaver.
Sure.
So, I don't know. I feel like the public part of my life here is at Zuzu's in Highland Park, and the private part of my life is once I go on that piece of property.
Sure. But you've also made, Highland Park iconic in, a couple of ways, not just Zuzu's, but the last Smashing
Tell it to the zoning committee.
The last Smashing Pumpkins record, is the tower.
Yes. Which, by the way, no one can seem to tell me what that tower is, which is kind of interesting.
It's called the North Shore Sanitary District Tower.
But that doesn't mean anything.
I know.
I have a theory, actually.
Well, tell me. I want to know the truth. Yeah, please.
My theory is that the tower was, judging by the architecture, it looks like to me Deco.
Yeah, 1930.
Okay, so
1931.
My thought is that the tower was put in as an observation because if you remember in the build up to World War II, there was a lot of fear that German subs were going to be able to come into Chicago's harbors and blow up the city because the city's basically right on the water. And so I think it was a military observation tower. And the way it's designed, it has nothing to do with it being an incinerator or anything like that. It has everything to do with a tower that's put there so you can see. Because basically from that vantage point, you can see all the way across the lake.
And did you choose that as the album cover as your photographer? Yeah. So what significance does that a tower have for you?
I don't know. I think it just represented a sort of sense of isolation to me. But I think it's hard to put those things into temporal language.
Right. Well, and for that cover, you worked with a local photographer who's been shooting the band for a while. Is he going to continue to work with you? Or are we going to see sort of more landmarks of Chicago on album covers and that sort of thing?
No. That was a once in a lifetime.
So I mentioned this tower, and it's got the unsexiest name in the world, the North Shore Sanitary District Tower, and it is just aching to be renamed. So how would you feel about someone naming it after you? I
would be totally against it. I'm not into honors that don't mean anything.
But again, the world's most unsexy name. It has sanitary district.
But the thing, I actually investigated around that time. I investigated with the Highland Park Historical Society and through the mayor's office, and I never got back a straight answer what the tower is. I don't think they know. And no one seems to know who owns it. I mean, I think the city claims it. Oh, that's what. No one knows who built it.
Oh, really?
Which is very interesting.
Huh. I'm also, again, interested in...
And don't forget, that's a pretty pristine... idyllic piece of property.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
it's right off Rosewood Beach.
And, so you just build a tower there?
Yeah.
Kind of strange.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard to get to. It's like fenced off. You can't go up to the base, all that sort of stuff.
And now it's closed down because the beach is closed where they're building some facility down there. So everyone could take their picture in front of it. It's like, no, I'm joking. It was like a tourist joke.
Yeah. No, it took me a while to figure it out because I was just there sort of just hanging out, and I was like, wait, I think that's the Pumpkins record. and I was trying to...
You got to get the right picture, yeah.
Yeah,
a lot of fans go there now, and they try to get the same angle.
Yeah, and you can't. You have to be behind the fence, or you have to have a great...
See.
Yeah, okay. you told Greg Cott a couple years ago, I'm on the road, I'm this character at home, I'm with my cats playing Xbox. Is that smart? Is that compelling at times? But I need to do it. So my question is, which Xbox games? No, I'm kidding.
No video games. Actually, I've sworn off video games now for 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just don't have time.
But the real question I bring this up is, but what is the difference between that character and you? The guy on the road, or the guy out, or the guy in the Highland Park at home?
Well, I think it has more to do with my philosophical bent about what it means to be a performing music artist.
Yeah.
Based on my behind-the-scenes estimation, I would say 80 to 90% of rock stars are not the people they portray themselves as on stage. Sure. It's either an amplified version of themselves, or it's some fantasy version of themselves. So I took, having maybe intuitively understood that from afar and then seen it up close, I took a different perspective, which is I could embody it like, I don't know, as if you were playing Shakespeare. So I create a character, or I have created characters by which to embody, and then I sort of embody them to sort of use that character to push a musical and a cultural agenda, which is not always expressed, and of course, which drives journalists up the wall, because most aren't bright enough to understand that I'm playing a character, so they attribute it to me personally, which has sort of led to this strange loop of personal attack, which we saw very recently here with my synthesizer show. It falls in the pomposity category, like who is he to do blank at what during this blank. They don't understand that part of my artistic agenda is to shift energy, because rock and roll is in idiomatic form is sort of played itself out. And outside of the expression of these kind of unspoken four corners, there's really not much else to do. Mm-hmm. You're probably never going to write a better song than John Lennon. You're probably never going to play a better kind of ruinous concert than the Stones played, in 73. You're never going to be heavier than Black Sabbath. You're never going to blank. You're never going to be cooler than Cheap Trick. So there's just a point where, well, what other corners are left for me as an artist to explore if I love rock and roll, if I want to continue to play rock and roll? And unfortunately, we have a codified language that people want their version of rock and roll reaffirmed, which is actually counterintuitive to what rock and roll is supposed to exist for. But that's the world we live in now. So if you're a rebellious spirit like I am, and you're actually trying to penetrate these areas which no one will touch, the third rail of rock and roll, talk about God and all this stuff, you're sort of held up for scorn. But behind the scenes, I'm just an artist who's portraying a character. The characters just have to be played by me.
Sure. Well, and for that, that was like an 8-hour marathon.
I would call it a marathon.
Yeah. Well, and that's my next question. Like, we're in the space where you did it. What was that experience like? You talked about some press before, but what was the experience like?
My pre-reviews?
Yes.
Not previews, pre-reviews.
Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic. I'd never done anything like that before. It was a singular experience. Anytime I've done 3 synth shows here now, and they're meant to be atmospheric kind of changers, atmosphere changers, like an immersive environment, not too different from, say, Disneyland or some art installation. You come in and you either feel something or you don't, and the doors open and you come and go. It's free. So it was great. I thought it was successful in that regard. It's a bit crazy to try to create music on the fly, on the spot, in front of an audience. That's pretty nerve-wracking.
Right. Well, and that I was just reading your Twitter feed this morning, and you're letting people in. Like, I saw a picture, I think, of your cat. Right? Was it this morning? And you were saying, "Hey, we're recording these new songs."
Oh, yeah.
And
the Pumpkins Nexus site.
The Pumpkins Nexus. But that seems to be a whole new thing. Like, Nico Case just did that with NPR. Like, she had these sort of little snapshots of like, "Hey, this is what the record is. Here's where the this is what it sounds like." So, what are the pros and cons of that relationship of welcoming your audience in while you're in process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't read anything that anybody's writing, so you start there, which should normally be, I would say, the downside, is that something somebody's going to say is going to negatively impact your process. The positive thing is that you're creating enough of a narrative for those that are interested to follow along. And I think in the information age, going away is basically death. You know, in the world I grew up in, you came real hard for a year, year and a half, then you went away for a year, then you came back. And there was sort of like a refreshed feeling, oh, they're back. Now if you go away, you're dead. You might as well be dead. So you have to figure out a way to stay present without being, I don't know what the right word is. You can't, it's like you got to walk this strange fine line.
But what impact does that have on you as an artist? Or again, I'm so interested in process. What is the impact there? I
think you just have to consider what you're going to share and why you're going to share it. And I think you have to be transparent in those things. You know, I think people are really clever these days to see through like the subversive marketing campaign or the we're not really marketing. You know, like there's those ads where it's like, you watch it and it looks like some viral video, but it's really a commercial.
Yeah.
I think people are really sensitive to those things, and not always negatively, but I mean, they're sensitive, you know. They only like being played if they feel like the playing is really clever. I don't have time to be clever. I don't have time to go through every press, you know, like let's say this is a press, I don't have time to go through every release like I'm putting out a press release.
Sure.
If I misspell a word, if I don't say something clearly, I don't have time for that. And I don't even have time to manipulate my audience. I don't have time to be clever. So the simplest thing, which Mark Twain once said, if you don't tell a lie, you don't have to remember anything, is just to be honest, you know, which is the daily struggle of trying to put together an epic album.
And I want to circle back to something else you said about the third rail of rock and roll, which is to mention God. And you mentioned this before, and in fact... it's
a good quote. I'm just going to keep hammering it until it becomes part of the lexicon of language. and
you've been working on this spiritual memoir for the last couple of years.
Yes, sir. In fact, I'm going to put up a report about it in the next few days.
Oh, cool. But
I'm happy to answer any questions.
But the title last time I checked was God is Everywhere, from Here and There. And so when can we expect it? If that is indeed the title, you can correct me there.
No, it is the title.
Okay. And then, again, I'm all about process. So what are the insights you gain from working on it? Because often, sometimes the process of putting it out puts your thoughts in order, or you discover new things. So 2 questions. When, and then what have you learned?
It should be done roughly by the end of this year.
Okay.
I've just finished, the book's in 4 sections, and I've just finished section 1 after a couple false starts, and that first section clocks in at about 120,000 words.
But that is a book.
Multiply that times 4.
Yeah,
that's what the book's going to be.
Yeah, that's a mini encyclopedia.
Well, yeah, and we'll see. You know, I haven't yet submitted what I've written to my editor, but I'm sure it'll be trimmed down a little bit, but I think there's something really interesting. It's sort of like a long language song, and you either get into the song or you don't. You know, it's sort of like Stairway to Heaven times 1,000 or something.
but have you been, you know, what have you learned?
Oh, you asked the process question.
Yeah, what have you been surprised by any part of it? Because again, that sort of writing tends to align your thoughts.
I was surprised that writing long form for book is far different than, say, writing 1,000 words for a short story or a little observational thing, or even a blog post. Because the long form narrative requires a completely different discipline that I didn't have. And I didn't go to college, you know, and I have no formal training. So being stubborn, I went into the process thinking, well, I could do this. And then when I was confronted with the fact that I couldn't, I had one of 2 choices. I was either going to bring in a ghostwriter or quit, or figure out how to figure out how to write a long form book. And so I've actually taught myself how to write long form, which has been probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Way harder than learn how to write music.
But what about what about spiritual insights? Anything that you learned just through that process? No,
I don't think it's that. I think I do think in order to have an observational quality, I've often talked about this with songwriting, because people will maybe point to a song and say, oh, that must have been really painful to write. And I've often said, well, I really can't write those songs until I'm past the emotional quality, because I can't be in an observational role. So in order to write about most things, you have to have already kind of accepted them. Or you're just going to it's basically a screed with a slant, and I don't think anybody wants to read that. It becomes a diatribe, not a narrative story.
Right.
And it's the observational role that one has to take in writing a book, even if the book's about yourself.
Sure.
in this case, it's a book about my impression of myself, rooted through a spiritual ideology, with the idea that if you follow this character's journey, you'll see his progression from point A to point D.
Sure.
So I don't think I'm learning anything spiritual from the process. I think I'm learning that my life, at every step of the way, has God in some piece of it, and I think that's probably the hardest thing for most people to accept.
Sure.
Is how does God reveal itself in tragedy? How does God reveal itself in places where it seems there is no place for God?
Sure. Well, and you've said before, many times in interviews that, you've been imbued by God to have a message. And
I've kind of gone off that a little bit. I'd have to say.
Please explain.
Please explain. No, I think what it is that everybody has a message.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of at times a disparate symphony.
Yeah.
So it becomes a choice of do you want to share your part of the chorus?
Sure.
And the modern life does afford us the opportunity, which is sort of interesting in a paradigm shifting way. Everyone can participate in the chorus now if they want. They can share a recipe. They can share a video of their cat. They can write about their children. They can create something and then just post the picture online and let somebody from on the other side of the world comment about it. So I think the idea that a person like me has to stand apart, I think that's actually counterintuitive to what I'm trying to get across. I don't want to stand apart. I've never wanted to stand apart. And there, of course, is a part of one's ego that wants to stand apart because it sort of justifies your excuse for your journey.
I was going to say, that's also rock and roll. What is rock and roll without alienation?
Thank you. But then there's the other part that one wants to be differentiated because you want to feel that, somehow your life is worthy or worth something.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's oftentimes at the expense of the things that really matter. For example, how many birthday parties have I missed of friends and family? How many Sunday picnics, when I could have been out in somebody's backyard listening to the Cubs game, those types of experiences are not a fair trade for, I was on stage in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And it takes understanding that kind of intrinsic balance to what the quality of life is to then really appreciate the opportunity that I have had, which has made me a lot less bitter about public life, but has also made me really appreciate my personal life in a way that I never did before. Because, of course, my personal life couldn't compete with those experiences because I'd set up a competition that rock and roll was always going to win.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of this memoir, I have just one more question, and that is just like, what then compelled you to write it, especially given the fact that you had to learn this whole new skill set. So, even though it's hard, why are you compelled to write it?
Well, two things. One, I wanted to be an author or a writer far before I wanted to be a music person. And secondarily, I just felt that that there was some reason I'd held on to all these memories. And so it was I reached a point where my life where it was either going to hit the delete button and just scrub them, because I was carrying around this obviously 400, what hopes to be over 400,000 words worth of memories, which of course, how real are they? I don't know, because they're in my mind.
Yeah.
And perception is everything when it comes to memory. Or do something with them, turn them into something.
And you are, nothing if not prolific. I also wanted to come back and
I don't know that the prolific sounds like really dignified.
It
feels more like I'm insane, because we're just preparing the Adore reissue right now.
Yeah.
And I listen to all this work and I think, oh my God, does this guy ever rest? And it's me that I'm listening to,
Yeah. Well, I was just listening to your cover of My Blue Heaven, actually.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. No, I love that rendition. Again, prolific. It's been reported you've had this 70 tune song cycle, and Chicago songs. They're inspired by Chicago history. What is the status of that project, and are any of those Highland Park songs?
No, I completed the first part of the cycle, the Chicago song cycle, in about 2004, and I was going to release it. I had a record deal at the time, and I was going to release it through that deal, and at the last second I changed my mind and I ended up making an electronic record instead. So that record has sat in the vaults. I'm actually just about to get the rights back for all my material, including, well, it's just too boring to get into. But anyway, I'm getting all my material back from the 2000s now, the rights. So I'll be able to reissue my 2000 work in sequence. And so the idea is that once I reissue the Zwan material, then I would reissue this material in sequence. I can't remember how many songs there are, but there's probably more like 40 or 50, but only 20 or so are about Chicago.
And the ones that are about Chicago, like, what are they about? You know, how are you celebrating your hometown?
It's probably not as literal as that. It was more trying to find some spectral quality, and it's more impressionistic, maybe. Honestly, it's been a while since I've listened to the work or connected with the work, so I don't even know if I could answer the question faithfully. I was surprised in writing it that a lot of it was about immigrants and people coming here. And Chicago is a place of opportunity because my family, my blood family and my step family all were immigrant, European immigrants. And so it was very much about the root of how Chicago got its sort of bare knuckle mentality. And in a way, how Chicago is a tougher place, but in conversely also a kinder place. Because I think we're probably one of the last cities on the planet that has maintained its humanity with its toughness. I don't think there's a more charitable city. I don't think there's a more forgiving city than Chicago. And it's not for people like me who, have a new confession. I mean, I think it's forgiving for like real folk. And I think that's what's, so it's all that seems to be woven in that material, but it was very, it was sort of, we call it conscious work, I didn't set out, I'm going to write a song about the Picasso statue or anything. There's nothing like that. It's more like a dream take on the city. I wrote it honestly, and I meant it at the time, and I've seen the quote since, and it sounds very almost pedantic or something. But I really wrote the city as my gift. I mean, I really wrote the song cycle as my gift to the city because I'd come out of this very difficult time in my life, and Chicago was like the one thing I could say, well, that saved me. Like I had to be here to be saved. And so maybe it'll mean something to somebody at some point. It's hard because once it got caught in the gears of commercial expectation and, the jerk that was running my record label and all that kind of stuff, you start going like, oh God, I can't, how does this match that? And that's when the dream ended. Sure.
And there's just a personal, like, sort of curiosity I have there's a little biographical, and you talk about, music saving you. And I mentioned to you before we sort of started that I had watched this Rush documentary that you're in. And at one point, and I know you're, again, a huge Rush fan, you learned to play, one whole side of 2112.
Oh, yeah.
And not only that, but you played your mother, Entre Nous, hoping that she'd sort of understand what you're into, but you don't finish that story. So what happened?
They probably edited me.
Well, but I'm interested. What happened? What was the impact of you sharing that music with her?
I don't think there really was an impact, I think for me the story was more that I felt compelled to try to share something with her that I thought was representing something that I couldn't have said myself. And obviously 25 years of public life, I've had that experience in reverse where people come up to me and say, I played this song for my sister, or, I played this song when my baby was born. In fact, a lady here the other day told me that she sang her child one of my songs when she held her first in her arms. It's like, what a staggering, crazy thing to even contemplate. That's the first moment between mother and child, and they're singing one of my songs. It's like, wow, I can't even process that. There's that word, process. So I think the story for me is that Neil's lyrics in that case said something that I couldn't say, or that my life wasn't saying to her.
But the bridge of that song is, "We are strangers to one another," or "We are strangers to each other."
I think it wasn't that. I think it wasn't the literal part of the lyric. It was that the lyric was conveying something emotional, and that I recognized the emotion in the lyric, and I wanted to show her that that I recognized it. It's like saying to somebody, I think this is a really good book.
Yeah.
And I think you'd get something from it. And they go, oh, not interested.
Yeah.
But that's not what I remember about the story. For me, it's that I felt compelled to say, listen to this, read this. I remember putting the lyric sheet in front of her and, her looking at the lyric sheet. So,
but no conversations, or did it spark, her to share other music?
You got to read the book on that. You got to read the book on that.
Let me see here. Again, I was just reading your Twitter feed, and again,
that's dangerous.
Yeah, it's very dangerous, but it's new and it's relevant. And you mentioned before that you're working on an epic record, but the release I saw said you have two. So is it a double record? It's Monuments to an LG and Day for Night. Are those
two related but separate records?
Okay. And the thing I'm hearing is guitars, glossy metallic. But what? Again, you're sharing this in public. How do you think it'll change the shape of those records? Is it just that you're broadcasting and you don't get anything in?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think you have a decision as a public artist in 2014. It might change. Yeah. But obviously it's changed, say, from even 5 years ago. And the decision you have to make is, are you going to front load your marketing with the public that can't wait for anything to happen, and then do like a surprise album, and then you front load all that press and that marketing into one moment, or you draw out a long narrative that takes people on a journey, so when you're ready to arrive at, say, the conclusion of at least part of that journey, they're going to have a different invested connection to what you're doing. And I think that's a choice you have to make. And I'm a bit of an extremist, but I don't think you can play the middle ground anymore.
Well, and
point is, I don't think it serves you to float out a piece of information like every 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't think that does any good. Everything gets swallowed so fast. And the way things work now is you could put out something very interesting, right? And we put out interesting things all the time. If it goes down the memory hole there, never shall it return.
Yeah.
So if somebody's not looking at their whatever that exact moment, it doesn't exist. I mean, it literally doesn't exist.
Just given the media cycle, right?
Given the way we consume information.
Yeah.
And of course that speaks to the business models of those entities and how they work, and and not only that, the culture of those things. Like if you try to overly push commercial things on people rebel. They're not signed up to your Twitter feed to see a running commercial. They're signed up because they're hoping you're going to say something interesting or point them to something interesting that was going to brighten their day.
Yeah.
And I respect that. So how does one market with dignity?
Well, and it doesn't seem to be marketing. I think for a lot of people, comedians do this almost better than anybody else, Ricky Gervais or whatnot. It's really sort of a conversation. I
don't think it's a conversation. I know that would offend some people, but I don't think it's a conversation. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of fans think of it as a conversation. I don't see it as a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Then what is it?
I think it's a soapbox, and you choose to stand in in front of whatever soapbox you want to stand in front of. Mm-hmm. Here's my point, and I mean this with respect. I've been in public life now, 25 years, and I've known people far more famous than I am, and people have done more monumental things and stuff like that. At no point in time do I think that I understand their experience. I can relate to their experience, but I don't understand it. So all you can do is sort of be a voyeur or a viewer, and if that person's willing to let you in, but they're not really letting you in. Yeah. So it's really no different than what I put here in the front window at Zuzu's. I don't see it as anything more than that. If you want to invest more, it requires something of the public that, generally speaking, they're not interested in. You know what I'm saying? Which is why somebody can have, 50 times more Twitter followers than they sell records.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why are 50 times more people invested in this character dialogue than they are in, say, the commercial output of that artist? I think that says a lot. I don't think it's a conversation. I think people pick and choose from the world of media that which represents or mirrors for them what they're looking for. And at no point do I think as a celebrity at the tier that I live at? Do I think that people above me or equal to me or even people below me, that I understand their experience and that I'm having a dialogue with them? Unless I'm standing in front of them and I can smell them and I can see what the look in their eyes and I can actually sort of empathize with their position, I can't believe a digital signature is a representation of a real relationship. So that's why on my Twitter feed and stuff, I don't pretend. I don't bother pretending. And trust me, I'd have far more Twitter followers if I did.
Yeah.
Because I would just be playing a different form of a character. But I've chosen on my Twitter to actually be myself.
Yeah.
In my musical life, I'm not myself or some variation of myself. But in those public forums, I'm myself, which actually is what's the opposite here? To your benefit, to my
detriment.
Detriment, thank you.
Well, and
does that make sense?
Yeah, but you also made me super self-conscious. Like, not unless I'm there smelling them, I'm like, oh my god, what do I smell like?
No, but even when you get into like the Twitter apology,
yeah. Well, and Colbert just deleted his show's account because somebody who he doesn't know representing him caused him all sorts of problems.
Right. I'd love to speak on that, but that's one of those things where it's like there's the third rail right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Setting that aside, again, we're living in a impressionistic world that is celebrating it as real. It's not real.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, in that particular instance, and I'll say it in very general terms. So what was said was posted. So somehow then there's then the person who said it claims. In his case, he claimed distance both from the character that he plays, which is something I would do, and then he also claims distance because he himself didn't post it, which is a convenient thing that anybody could say, because again, we're not talking about reality.
Yeah.
So, is a tweet real? Is a Facebook post real?
It does if it has real world implications and consequences. Matthew Weiner.
But who chooses, right? So the mob that decides one thing is real decides another thing isn't real. And at the risk of going into politics here for a second, that's what the U.S. government has figured out. That as long as they tell the public what they want to hear, they will ignore real statistics consistently.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you can have one mouth of the government saying, like the CBO, here's the statistics, here's the data. And then literally the political arm will come out and say, oh, no, that's not true. And the public will believe the voice that it wants to believe, right?
But there's a whole book about that. You know, what's the matter?
There's more than a book. Yeah, I mean, there's more than a book.
But you know, like what's the matter with Kansas? You know, people vote against their own self-interest. So that's politics.
But that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. I'm not trying to digress into those topics. I'm just trying to say that depending on what side of the mirror you're on, right? In my case, let's say I'm tweeting something out. At no point do I think that what I'm tweeting is real. Nor are the people reading it ultimately going to have a real response. They're going to have a response based on the way that they read that message.
Yeah.
Now, if you're savvy, which I'm not, you learn to manipulate and modulate that message so that you maximize what people believe on the other end. But and here's a spiritual point. You're actually investing in something that's not real. And I believe that falls under the teachings of all the great avatars. If you invest in something that's not real, what do you think you're going to get back? Now, there's a process.
Yeah. Well, but not only that, but again, it's one of these things that if it has impact, then you can't say it's not real. And I understand.
Listen, no one in the last 20 years as a musical artist has annoyed and pissed off more people than I have, at least that I can think of, at least in rock and roll.
Let's make up a short list. So.
Okay, go ahead. I'll follow. Let's rate the people who've annoyed people. Who's your number one?
Courtney Love.
But has she really annoyed people with musical things?
I don't think she...
See, I'm qualifying against my former parent.
Yeah. No, I don't think she... I think it's her social life and her Twitter activity that has polarized her. In fact, taken attention away from her musical career.
I would agree with that.
But that is a.
But I'm saying I've done a better job of making people angry with music. But the reason I'm saying that is because, to your point, a reaction is a positive. But okay, then I've done a lot of positive things because I've made a lot of people angry. by not playing certain things, by doing certain things musically. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's not, the reaction isn't real. Yes, it affects real things like record sales or ticket sales, but it's not real because those things are not invested in real values.
But it's a medium. It's just a Marshall McLuhan medium. The medium is the message.
I think we've crossed the Rubicon into a different conversation in that regard because, yes, it's a medium, but it's a medium that doesn't exist.
That's like saying the telephone doesn't exist.
I think that's a good point, but I don't think the telephone engenders this level of fantasy. I mean, yeah, you can call somebody who's pretending to be, I don't know, whomever, from God knows where, and puts on a funny voice so you can do whatever, right? My point being is that we now have a new communication system that fosters, engenders, and profits from the fantasy, and it's a fantasy. It is a literal fantasy. It is not real.
I just don't see how that's any different than any other mass medium, whether that's movies or TV.
I think you have to look at the effect it's having on people's real lives.
But again, I don't
listen. When the telephone came out, was it followed by studies that said that people are more depressed because they have the telephone than before? We consistently see studies now that say the people who overuse the internet are depressed. They now have new areas of psychological study because people are addicted to the internet. I'm certainly addicted to eBay, right? Yeah. Okay. So what is it about that form that has taken on a kind of a simulacra, holodeck for you Star Trek fans type of thing? Right? I think it's a little bit more dangerous than that, and I think the way the governments are now trying to control the internet and the free expression in there tells you how dangerous that is.
Well, it's also interesting that, the founders of Twitter, like the reason they founded Twitter, literally, this was the reason they founded it, so they would be less lonely. That was the stated purpose.
Well, it's made me more lonely. I could tell you that.
I want to get back. We sort of touched on so many things that,
How am I doing so far?
PAWS is your charity of choice. So you have at least two kitties, right, that are PAWS kitties?
Yes.
All right. So why this charity? Why did you choose this charity?
First of all, the greatest argument for PAWS as something to invest in is the no-kill shelter policy. They do, of course, if an animal's really sick or mad, they do euthanize that pet. Animal, sorry. But beyond that, I mean, the fact that they had a dog for 3.5 years that had no hind legs, and they were able to place that pet into care. I think that's incredible. But there's a level of humanity at PAWS that I've never seen from any animal-related charitable organization.
But in terms of just, I don't know, pets in your life, or, you could have chosen anything, but why an animal charity? Is it because you've always been an animal owner, or what is it?
I think that it's very difficult when you're given a lot of choices in terms of where you would want to put your energy to help somebody.
Yeah.
When you get into things, and I have, that involve the medical field, sometimes there's a lot of weird politics there, and you have to wonder if maybe the forces behind it want to keep people sick and whether they really want to get people well. I think PAWS has no politic to it. Yeah. When you're talking about taking care of animals, reducing the number of strays, the spaying and neutering, and the amount of energy that goes into it, and the effect it's had on our community. When you hear, I can't quote the numbers, but when you see the numbers in the shelters in Chicago since PAWS came around and all this, that I think they've down to 1/3 of the amount of euthanizations at the Chicago city shelters. It's remarkable numbers, and it has everything to do with PAWS aggressive program. They're going to put in an adoption center up here in Highland Park. Very excited about that.
In the Petco, right?
Yeah. And we're going to do some events here. We're going to do, actually really soon, I think in the next couple of weeks, we're going to do a, volunteer drive.
Yeah.
To get people to volunteer for PAWS, because it's very volunteer driven.
Yeah.
And I know the people that run the organization, and I'm just really proud to be associated with them.
What are your cats' names?
Mr. Tom and Sammy with an I.
And where does that come from?
Well, the cats were delivered to what was, I think at the time, the only PAWS center that they had in 2003 when the Cubs were in the playoffs, or about to go into the playoffs in 2003, the fateful Bartman playoffs. And the mother, who I think had one eye and was all tore up, was left in a box with 4 kittens, 2 of which are my cats. And So all the kittens were named after Cubs players. So Mr. Tom was originally Moises.
Okay.
And I've met Moises Alou a few times, but not a name for a cat. God bless him.
It's hard to yell.
And Sammy was named after Sammy Sosa. And despite the controversies involving Sammy, I kept Sammy's name and just changed it to an I for a girl.
Okay. And you have 2 dogs. Either of them named Kingman? I know you're a Kingman fan.
I'm a huge Kingman fan. In fact, I saw Dave Kingman once hit a home run. That like bounced off one of the buildings on is it Sheffield?
Yeah, across the street.
Yeah, I mean, insane. He hit 220, but when he hit a home run, it was like when you're a kid. I mean, when Dave Kingman hit a home run, it was none better. That he ruined all our swings because we all started swinging upwards like he did. My dogs' names are Chin Chin and Ling Ling.
Okay. Billy, I can't thank you enough. We sort of went all over heck.
Of course, yeah.
But
I'm a free spirit.
Yeah, no. You've been listening to The Big Questions. This is Robert K. Elder. Billy, thanks again.
Thank you.